Phails at philosophy. What the heck could it be? Life such a mystery. Phails.
The human person, the human action, and the consequences, which is the virtue theories,
Right.
deontological theories, and the consequentialists or utilitarians.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think all three of those are really helpful for thinking through questions of what I should do.
All three of them.
Right. And
It's not like you choose one.
what I
actually
dislike
thought, like, I was
about
supposed
this,
to choose one.
right? What I dislike about his presentation is he presents them as if they're these competing normative
That's
theories.
what I thought.
And a lot of intro to ethics textbooks do that, and it's nonsense, right? You know, like none of them have been able to establish them as themselves as total theories.
Well, it does seem like the authors thought, like, Kant was like, no, Aristotle was wrong, this is how it is.
Yeah, but
and Mill was like, no, I think the both of them are wrong, this is how it is.
Right, and I think that's wrong. Like,
You're like, all three of them are wrong.
no, I mean,
It's actually all three of them is
no,
how
I think
it
when I
is.
read Kant, I don't think Kant is saying Aristotle is
okay.
junk.
Right.
I think he has a very particular question he's trying to answer, which is what makes an action moral. And, you know, it's partly that they have very different questions that they're trying to answer about how we make good moral decisions. Aristotle basically says, like, look, we have to think through this, but most decisions you're not making because you're thinking through it. Most of you go throughout the day, you're not being nice to your mom because every time you see her, you're like, I should be nice to my mom.
It's not about the action. It's about, for him, it's about everything you've done up until then and whether or not you're a good kid that loves his mom because of all the things that happened up until that question
Right.
of you're asking and you're not actually doing, it's not a human, you're not thinking about the consequences, you're not thinking about that action, but if you are a mom-loving person, you're going to say,
Right.
hey, Mom, I love you.
But that's not what he's saying, right? Like, I think that's exactly
That's a virtue theory.
That's what you
Right.
get a virtue theory from reading this little summary of it. But that's not what Aristotle's saying. He's saying, obviously, thinking about the consequences of your actions, that's a good virtue. You should do that, right? When you have the moment to do that, right?
Yeah.
But more often what happens is you have these spaces where you can think through things. So use your reason, figure it out, and then train yourself to be a good person by acquiring certain types of habits.
Ooh, this is a word I want to share that I looked up. Inculcation.
Right.
Inculcation, or the instilling of knowledge or values in someone, usually by repetition. That's what you're talking about there.
Right. Or habituation.
Habituation.
Right.
I already knew that word.
Yeah. I mean, well, and it's interesting because virtue ethics basically has an influence on two major ways we approach things. One is self-cultivation.
Uh-huh.
Which, you know, if you're following some self-help program or engaging in any kind of like yoga beyond just physical yoga, you're engaging in some form of self-cultivation.
Yeah.
And so you're engaging in some sort of virtue ethical
This is
practice.
self-help. This is
Right.
anything that you would
Right.
constitute like personal or professional development.
Right.
Right.
And the other side is education, and particularly character education, right? So really what he's trying to do is like, how do we figure out what are the things we should cultivate in ourselves? Courage, humility.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things we should, when we educate our children, or even educating adults, but they're often thinking in the ancient world about education of children,
Yeah.
we should teach each other to do? Courage, humility, etc. And then how do we go about doing that?
Yeah.
That doesn't say you're not thinking about consequences when you're thinking about whether you're going to do something
Well,
right
they're
or not.
thinking this will get us the consequences
Right.
we want.
Right. Well, and that, like, yeah,
But they are thinking about consequences.
consideration of the consequences of your action, that's a good way. So instead of focusing on the calculus of how I do that, he's focusing on that particular question. Now, on the flip side, if we go to Mill,
Yeah.
I mean, they all do think which one is primary, right? That's that, like, so it's more like the real work is making yourself a good person for Aristotle. The real work for Mill is figuring out how to do that assessment, right? He basically assumes he's talking to people who want to do good in the world, right? Like, he's not. There's a level at which I think for utilitarian ethics, I can't convince you whether you should be good or not, right? I should just begin there. I think a really good example of this is Peter Singer's drowning child argument, right? Because in the article where he presents that, he basically starts off and he says, I'm going to assume for this that you are the type of person who believes that if you're walking by a pond and you see a child drowning in the pond,
Yeah.
your job is to jump in and save them.
Save that child.
Right?
Yeah.
Assuming you have the capability to do that.
Yeah.
Right? That you know how to
And
swim.
you're
etc.
not in a wheelchair.
Right.
That you know how to swim.
And even if you're wearing your best Armani suit,
right, you're going to jump in there with that
you
suit
jump in
on.
there
Yeah.
and get that child.
Absolutely.
Right. And if you don't believe that,
Then
I
we're
don't
not
have-
in the same discussion.
right, we're not in the same discussion.
You can't even be in this room
Right.
with me. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the covered charge
Right.
for this club.
Yeah, and I think when we think about moral philosophy, a lot of times we get hung up on that, like, should we say? And I think most of us aren't there, right?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting game to play, like, well, do I have an obligation to save the drowning?
I wouldn't think about any of that.
Right, like it's not...
You're not going to run through
Right.
this chapter before you
Right.
save this child.
That's not what most people want out of moral philosophy, right? And so, at least that's not a good place to begin.
It's a low hanging fruit. I don't need help with that one.
Right, exactly. Singer's argument is interesting because he makes a very compelling argument in that article. I've never seen anyone get around it except to fundamentally really think how we think about ethics, which is, if you believe that's true, you should be working hard, making as much money as you can, and living next to poverty on those wages and giving all your money away to combat world hunger. Right?
Dang.
And if you're not doing that, you're failing morally.
It's a long... Okay, I don't know how we got there. That's
right.
like another...
I mean, and he's thinking about it as a consequentialist, like Mill.
Yeah.
He's like basically like, what are the consequences of your actions, and what is your fundamental moral duty? And he basically says, look, we're in a world where, one, you are aware of the suffering of others. You're aware of the suffering in the kids in Gaza. You're aware of the suffering of all these people around the world.
Yeah, your awareness.
And two, we actually have the capability
We
to
could do
help.
something to impact
Right.
that.
And what most people who are trying to work on doing that need is your money. So you should give them your money.